As you might have heard, or seen with your very own eyes as you take your afternoon strolls along the Thames, a seismic shift is rumbling through London's illustrious centres of financial power and political intrigue. Long ensconced as the playground of Britain's old money aristocracy, this enclave of enduring privilege is being infiltrated by an avant-garde of global wealth. In our 21st century, the old guard, families with historic ties to fertile lands and political dynasties, finds itself jostling for room with a rising wave of foreign financiers. You see, the landscape is no longer solely coloured by long-standing British families like the Grosvenors and Cadogans, but by new players with contrasting cultures and vastly different recipes for the direction of the capital of the United Kingdom. Long-held bastions of hereditary affluence are witnessing the influx of a new cadre of economic titans, moguls from Moscow and magnates from the Middle East. And they're not waiting for an invitation. They're knocking down doors and making their presence felt, leaving the old elites contemplating their place in a rapidly evolving paradigm. How did this all happen so quickly? What led the British old money crowd to loosen their grip on power in just a few short decades? In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we'll answer those questions and more as we describe why old money United Kingdom families sold London to global oligarchs. In the labyrinthine financial corridors of London's historic elite, the underpinnings are as nuanced as they are enduring, intimately knit with the political and economic pulse of the city. It's a terrain marked by colossal inheritances spanning multiple generations, underscored by financial behemoths that comprise a diverse range of assets, from stately lands to equities and international pursuits. But pivot your gaze toward emerging power centers like Moscow or the Middle East, and a different narrative emerges. Unlike London's pedigreed aristocracy, which draws its affluence largely from hereditary opulence and familial legacies, the nouveau riche of these regions have a genesis rooted in contemporary wealth gained by a shrewd and no-holds-barred entrepreneurial spirit. Be it the windfalls of oil, the dynamism of technology, or the levers of political affinity, their ascendance is more immediately economic, less marinated in the intricate choreography of societal and governance histories that have shaped London's old money hierarchy. For instance, among London's wealthiest individuals, you'll find people like Alisher Usmanov from Russia, reportedly worth more than £12 billion, who made his fortune in metals and mining, or Egyptian multi-billionaire Nassef Sawiris, known for his investments in construction and chemicals. And this distinction between the London old guard and the new money players isn't merely academic. It extends into how these elites maneuver their influence. London's aristocracy wields significant financial power, which they channel into an ecosystem of philanthropic foundations and direct political influence. Their strategy serves two purposes: preserving their enormous wealth and carefully shaping their social and political standing. It's not just about skyline-altering real estate. Their imprints are indelibly etched into London's basic frameworks, from public utilities to laws and popular opinion. Additionally, scions of London aristocracy, families like the Grosvenor and the Cadogan, have been arbiters in the political landscape, historically ensconced in the House of Lords and adept at lobbying. Beyond this, they've been visionaries of urban landscapes, their sprawling real estate portfolios in prime territories like Mayfair and Belgravia serving not just as centres of influence, but as a catalyst for the city's very design. In the cosmopolitan tableau of New London, Russian oligarchs and Middle Eastern moguls are carving out their own spheres of influence with striking speed. Unlike the city's pedigreed elite, whose influence has evolved over centuries within the corridors of governance, these newcomers are fast-tracking their way into political prominence. Their currency, strategic investments in pivotal sectors and hefty political contributions. While London's established elite have historically curated the city with a long-view stewardship, this new ilk often treats London as another portfolio asset, calibrated for immediate dividends. The shift is more than superficial. It speaks to a profound metamorphosis in the philosophies guiding the city's growth and governance, with the byproduct of this tectonic shift often meaning a dilution of old money strongholds. Long-standing families like the Grosvenors and Cadogans are finding their enclave borders increasingly porous. The drivers of this change are twofold. Firstly, London's marquee real estate has become a global magnet for capital, touted as both a secure and glamorous investment. Secondly, the financial muscle of some of these heritage families is waning, partly due to shifting tax landscapes and the exorbitant costs of estate upkeep. Foreign capital not only elevates property values, but also infuses much-needed liquidity. The catch? The guardians of London's traditional epicenters must now mingle with a new cadre of global titans who bring their own set of cultural and fiscal mores. Enter the City of London, colloquially known as the Square Mile. A nexus for global commerce and banking, its relationship with London's aristocratic families is fascinatingly complex. These families have often been the invisible hand, owning the land that fueled the city's financial engines. Their fortunes were inextricably tied to the rise and fall of the city's economic vitality. Yet the relationship was far from one-dimensional. The city's prosperity indirectly fattened the coffers of these families, while their land and capital allowed the city to proliferate. They were both puppeteers and beneficiaries in London's intricate socio-economic performance, holding sway in ways that cannot be easily erased. As we look ahead, the question looms, in this evolving landscape, will the newcomers find a way to weave their own legacy as seamlessly into London's complex tapestry? No, it won't be a simple insertion. It is a reconfiguration of the city's very DNA, marking a new epoch in our capital's history. Now, in a financial dynamic characterized by shifting tides, London's storied old money families have found themselves navigating a relentless sea of economic and political challenges throughout the 20th century. These pressures have siphoned off their traditional financial heft and political clout, while simultaneously creating a vacuum for international capital to flood in. The Crucible, a series of pivotal moments that changed the very foundation of their wealth. The repercussions of World War I served as an initial reckoning. The conflict's economic drain led many blue-blooded families to part with prized assets, from expansive estates to cherished art collections, just to uphold their lifestyle. The 1911 Parliament Act then chipped away at their political leverage, curbing the influence of the House of Lords, a realm where many had historical seats. But perhaps the most transformative change lay in the realm of finance. With the outbreak of World War I, the Bank of England abandoned the gold standard, a bulwark of predictability for those with deep pockets. The move to fiat currency led to a cascade of ramifications. First off, the ballooning money supply drove inflation, eroding the real value of old money assets like bonds and even depreciating the worth of their grand estates. Secondly, the shift injected a new dose of volatility into the economic environment. The pound, now untethered from gold, became more susceptible to market whims and policy missteps. These families, long accustomed to investing in stable assets, found themselves on shaky ground. The new currency landscape was directly tied to government stability and economic vitality, rendering their wealth more vulnerable to economic shocks. Third, the financial metamorphosis heralded a structural economic shift. Traditional wellsprings of affluence, like land and agriculture, began to wane in profitability. On the other hand, emerging sectors like manufacturing and services rose to prominence. The aristocracy, slow to pivot, saw their economic might diminish. Lastly, the advent of a more flexible monetary policy, including the Bank of England's newfound ability to set interest rates, introduced another layer of complexity for these families. No longer could they count on a predictable economic landscape. They had to adapt to more levers being pulled in the management of their wealth. But the trials didn't end there. World War II further strained resources, compelling even more families to surrender ancestral lands. Then came post-war policies that turned the screws on hereditary wealth, exorbitant inheritance taxes, and the Labour government's commitment to a welfare state. So here we stand, amidst a transformed economic and political topography. While the heritage of old money families remains an ineradicable part of London's identity, the question that looms large is, can they adapt fast enough to maintain their historical role in this ever-evolving landscape? Now, in the autumnal haze of 1986, London's financial heartbeat underwent an extraordinary change. This transformation, known as the Big Bang, was a suite of deregulatory reforms championed by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The The changes tore down barriers to entry in financial services, introduced computerized trading, and magnetized foreign capital toward the city's bustling trading floors. While this flurry of change created new empires of affluence, it left the British old money families grappling with an evolving landscape that seemed increasingly inhospitable to their traditional influence. The symbolic moment came when Prince Al-Walid bin Talal acquired a significant stake in the Savoy Hotel in 1988. Iconic British institutions were suddenly becoming the acquisitions of wealthy foreign investors. A sensation of vulnerability permeated the walls of grand manors and estates, long considered inviolable sanctuaries. These large estates became burdensome to maintain financially, particularly during the era of rising costs that characterized the late 80s. Reluctantly, many British elite families converted their ancestral homes into public attractions or commercial enterprises. Each entry ticket sold and each business transaction conducted eroded centuries of family legacy. And still, by the conclusion of the 1980s, many families remained in precarious financial straits. But if the 80s were rocky, the 90s were tumultuous. The decade opened with a recession, pulling down property values and putting a financial stranglehold on old money families. The infamous Black Wednesday in 1992 was a further blow. The UK's exit from the European exchange rate mechanism precipitated a devaluation of the British pound, wreaking havoc on long-term investments. The financial arena continued to evolve. Hedge funds and private equity firms emerged as new conduits for investment, diverting resources from traditional asset pools. Tony Blair's ascension in 1997 added salt to the wound. His Labour government's tax policies, especially those targeting capital gains and inheritance, compelled further liquidation of cherished family assets. As the millennium approached, the old money families of Britain found themselves at a crossroads in a substantially altered financial landscape. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw London wrestling with an existential conundrum as the British aristocracy's influence waned in the face of a new wave of global wealth. High-profile Russian oligarchs, such as Roman Abramovich, began claiming stakes in prized London assets. The acquisition of Chelsea Football Club in 2003 by Abramovich was a clear demarcation, announcing that London's economic and cultural stage was now open to the global elite. Investment rationales were diverse. Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem's purchase of P&O, a maritime and ports company, showcased strategic long-term planning. It was not just about buying assets, but about embedding oneself in global networks of power and influence. These investments, for players like Sulayem, were bridges to greater geopolitical leverage, crossing national boundaries in their reach. Other figures like Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani adopted a different strategy, using London as a canvas for portfolio diversification. Purchases spanned from real estate to financial entities, a blend calculated to minimize risk while maximizing gains. The moves not only fortified their financial standings, but wove them into the complex fabric of the British economic landscape. But their influence stretched further than the real estate sector. Increasing foreign influence over London's economic trajectory sparked debates over British sovereignty and identity, elevating foreign wealth into a hot-button political issue. London's neighbourhoods, too, underwent dramatic alterations. Globalization uprooted family-owned shops and local pubs, making room for boutique stores and high-end residences. The alterations led to the displacement of long-term residents, changing the character of the city. Perhaps the most disquieting aspect was the looming question of how foreign wealth might be swaying local politics. There was a growing unease that policy decisions were being tailored to suit these newly influential inhabitants. The presence of international capital was no longer confined to the corporate sphere. It had seeped into the corridors of governmental power. As London's economic and ownership landscapes metamorphosed, so did its socio-political identity. The foreign billionaires, brandishing their financial influence like artists with brushes, were recoloring London's identity in intricate and subtle ways. Though London had always been a hub of global exchange, the new millennium introduced layers of complexity that left even seasoned analysts pondering the future of London's identity. The transformation marked not merely an alteration, but a profound questioning of what it meant for London to be British in this increasingly interconnected world. And now we'd like to see you in the comments. What is your opinion on the changing face of London? Do you celebrate it as a truly global city that is able to change with the times? Or do you long for a past where it was a bit more contained, so to speak?